Let's try for 6:32, if that suits everybody else.
Sure.
Could you let me know, Will, because my computer clock doesn't seem to be working.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll let you guys know when it's 6:32.
Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right, it is 6:32.
Thank you. Uh, I'd like to welcome everybody to the November Zoning and Development Committee meeting. My co-chair, Anthony Cohn, is here. I'm Elizabeth Ashby, the other co-chair who's here, and Sharon Pope Marshall unfortunately isn't well and can't be with us. And before we get to the agenda of the meeting, I hand you over to Will Brightbill, who will tell you how to participate.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome, everybody. If this is your first time joining us, or maybe the first time in a long time, you'll notice right now that you're muted, and everybody is going to stay muted throughout the duration of the meeting, except for our co-chairs, Elizabeth and Anthony. As we move through the agenda, the co-chairs will call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon on your device and pressing the raise hand button. It's not the wave or the thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press the raise hand button once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute whenever you're called on. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once one of the co-chairs calls on you. The chat is available tonight for technical support only to help with Zoom software. It's not to ask questions or make comments to the co-chairs. They will never see those chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you may need to go to the participant section, or you'll find the raise hand feature there. And finally, we encourage you not to raise your actual hand or wave at the screen to get our attention, because we may not be able to see you. So if you're having problems, chat me. I'm here for support. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Anthony and Elizabeth.
Anthony, up to you.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Tonight we're here to talk about the zoning zoning and development implications of the City of Yes proposals. And I think that we've all, hopefully all of us or most of us, were able to be present at the board meeting where this was discussed, and also at the and also have had a chance to look at it online. And the purpose here is for us to produce at the request of the Department of City Planning a list of questions and comments for which hopefully we will be able to get answers directly from them. Someone from Department of City Planning is supposed to be here, although offhand I don't know who.
Yes, we do. We have
okay.
Olivia.
Oh, right. Okay.
I saw her earlier.
Yeah,
she may have
yeah.
come and gone, but she'll
chickened out. No, she was here. I definitely saw her.
So she may have had some service issues or something, but yes.
Okay. So I think that it's important that everyone keep their comments as much as possible to sort of zoning issues related to the City of Yes, because other committees or even in joint committees, we will be talking about a lot of the other implications. But as most of the proposals contained within it are zoning change dependent, I think I'm not sure exactly what we won't be able to talk about. So members of the public who are interested in speaking to this issue should, or asking questions, which we may or may not be able to answer, please queue up now. Okay, and while the rest of you are queuing up, we have Ben Wetzler. It's important that we try and keep our comments reasonably concise. Well, we only have 32 of us, but we're all capable of going on a long time. So,
can you hear me?
Great. Yeah, can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I wanted to just, I haven't had a lot of time to review all of the proposals, but I do want to kind of say that I'm very excited that the city is approaching the affordable housing shortage that we have in a way that covers every neighborhood in the city and doesn't treat it one building at a time, which, as I think everybody can agree, is not a great way to produce affordability and mostly favors kind of large politically connected real estate developers and has not been meeting the city's needs. So something that kind of is universal and expects every part of the city to do its fair share is a good approach. And so I hope that the board will, and that this discussion tonight will kind of cover things with that in mind. I'm specifically excited about the university affordability preference, which would guarantee that basically any building in the city that has or anywhere in the city would have the option to include affordable housing and get favorable treatment under the zoning resolution as a result of that. Right now, the existing voluntary and mandatory inclusionary housing programs don't really work. I think they've been kind of a disaster, and so fixing a lot of those problems and making it just a thing that applies citywide would be very good. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Let's see. We have Elaine Walsh.
Good evening. I have a question really relates to the presentation that was done last week, which had to do with the commercial use of space in residential facilities or housing. My concern is by putting commercial into the residential, and we've seen this on the lower end of buildings, you are going to eliminate affordable housing. We have experiences. I'm gonna pick 85th between 2nd and 3rd, where the first flight up, which for me would be the 2nd floor, for some it's the 1st floor, that became commercial and we lost residential and they were affordable. Nothing has been spoken to about this issue. So I'm not going to get into the other pieces, but on this one, we are losing affordable housing if they're allowed to move in. The other thing is to have in buildings where you had zoning for medical facilities, which are now not being used as much. What kind of facilities or businesses would be allowed in there? How does it respond to current zoning? And I'm sorry, we live in a residential community. Many of our buildings are mixed use. But to take residential buildings and now try to squeeze in a barbershop was one of the examples or something else, raises issues around pollution, air conditioning vents, etc. And this would be for any business going in, particularly if it's a food store, or maybe these new cannabises that are setting up. So I think, you know, things have not been looked at to review not just zoning, but quality of life for the people who live in the buildings that might be affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. I think that you raise a very good point. I think the intent of the proposal vis-a-vis home businesses is that if you are, let's say, an architect, you can have people. But I think I think that was the intent. I think that it is easily subverted where you are, in fact, your home is, it's not your home, it's literally just your business. And I think that that there needs to be a lot more clarity on that and a number of the other proposals. So I think that's actually a very good point.
But can I
Go
just
ahead,
say
Elaine.
in response, if you're in a co-op or a condo, there are regulations there. You can't just overstep them. And I'm not talking about the accountant who works from his office at home, or the architect, or the social worker, or whoever. We're talking about new businesses being
Exactly.
operate. The others have been, depending on what their lease allowed. And co-ops and condos are not going to fall over on some of these changes that are proposed. So that's what I'm talking about. I understand the other, you know, where you're.
No, but I think that was the intent, and I think it's easily, I can imagine it easily being subverted.
Yes.
Especially in rental buildings, where the landlord may be unwilling to exert control if he's getting a lot more rent as a consequence. As Marco nods vigorously. Next, we have Diego Barberena.
Mike, I agree with this effort to get more affordable housing. And I agree also with the city, which their plan, for what I know, it's only to increase it 20%, which is not a lot. I mean, it's a little, but not a lot. My concern is, it seems like the board used to have this push to have height limits for middle block to 6 stories, and then on the avenue somewhere around 20 something stories. And from last meeting and the approval of this ULURP, it seems like if people are going to put affordable housing, they can do whatever they want and propose 46 stories high. So my question to the board is, are there going to be limits? Are they still going to look for limits in heights and densities, or if there's affordable housing, anything goes? That's it.
Thank you. And I think that's again a good point. And I think that you'd be surprised at how much bigger 20% more of a building can be. Next, we have DK Falkson.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second.
There you are.
Hi, I just want to give a couple comments in support of a lot of the zoning changes in City of Yes. I'll just mention briefly, I'm a member of Open New York, which is a pro-housing advocacy group that operates here in the city. I think everyone's acutely aware of the housing crisis that's affecting the entire city, and our neighborhood. The Upper East Side is definitely included. We've seen growing rents. It's harder to find places. It's harder to find places that are right sized for your particular family size or your needs. And I think City of Yes kind of gives a unique opportunity to try and solve some of these issues. There's been a lot of pushback, I think, against individual rezonings. We've seen it at these community board meetings. So I think it is worth pointing out that City of Yes affects the entire city. It's citywide. It's changing different rules for different types of neighborhoods. So some here in the Upper East Side may say it's already really dense. We don't need to build any more housing, which I don't fully agree with. But this is also going to make a lot of zoning changes in the very undense parts of the city that might be zoned for single family, by allowing more apartment buildings near train stations, areas that are kind of underpopulated. So it's a very comprehensive approach to addressing housing needs. And a lot of the zoning changes really recognize that restrictive zoning has been a significant contributor to housing shortages. So by changing these zoning laws, we can make way for more housing options that are affordable, that are accessible, suitable for a diverse range of New Yorkers. We want, the Upper East Side to be a place that everybody can call home, and that has not been the case for a while. So it means welcoming more families, more young professionals, allowing, more of a mix of housing types. If you get into the details and you look at how some of the FAR changes, how some of the building envelope changes might be allowed, they are not that extreme. If you look at, R7, R8, some of the zoning that affects our area. But taken across an entire neighborhood, it can mean a significant amount of new units being allowed to be built, and that can really chip away at the high housing costs. So I would just say, our community district, I think, needs to do our part, but it is not just us. It's affecting the whole city. I will stop there.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to once again, which I will now do literally at every opportunity, to mention that Community District 8 has a density of well over 100,000 people per square mile, which is to say that the population density of Community District 8 is the largest. We are the densest 2 square miles in the United States and among the densest 2 square miles on the planet. And anybody who says we need more people is fooling themselves. We are nowhere. And in fact, if we look, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any more people anywhere, and we shouldn't have more affordable housing. But if we look at the least dense borough, which would be Staten Island, if it were a city all by itself, would be the 11th densest city in the United States. All by itself, the least dense portion of New York City. The other 4 boroughs would be 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sorry, I can't stop myself. Now we have Boaz.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, I'm in support of the City of Yes. I'm in support of adding more units, even here in Upper East Side. Anthony, you can say that I'm fooling myself, but I want to tell you one thing. Okay, I want to tell you one thing. During Thanksgiving, I'm not from here, I'm immigrant, so my wife and I hosted a bunch of friends. We had teachers in the table, we had nurses, we had scientists, doctors from all the field. And their main complaint, their main issue was the housing crisis. The fact that we are all market rate, the fact that all our salary go to the rent. And yeah, we deserve to be part of the city as well. I agree that there is a tension between people that owns apartment, condo owners, and people that maybe that are already in a rent control or affordable housing, but it's I understand your position, but you need to understand our position as well, and we need to. Eventually, we need to work together and find a solution for everyone, not just for the one group. And I understand that the market rate are disproportionate in the community board. So you all agree. But if you look at what's going on Upper East Side, many of the residents are market rate. And so you, as a co-chair of this committee, you don't represent only your group that you belong. You represent everyone, including the market rate people. And so bottom line, me, my family, my friends, we all support more development in Upper East Side, in Manhattan, in Staten Island, in the Bronx, and so on. We have a housing crisis, and yeah, we need to resolve it. But we are really focusing on community board aid. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? I don't see any other hands. Oops, Jonathan Zweig just raised his hand. And here he is. No, there you
Hello. Hi, thank you. My name is Jonathan Zweig. Thanks for allowing me to participate today. I just wanted to express my support for the proposal, and in particular, lifting as many restrictions as possible or expanding them such that more housing can be built. I certainly understand that everybody has their own perspective on what the right amount of density is and what our cities should look like. But I would suggest that, everybody's opinions aside, there's a market in which there's a tremendous amount of demand, far more demand than there is supply, and that leads to prices skyrocketing and housing becoming unaffordable for many, many people, and rent, and even those who can afford housing, rent being an extreme burden. So I would suggest that let's put aside everybody's personal subjective preferences and listen to what the market is telling us, which is that that new housing needs to be built, a tremendous amount of it, and I firmly believe that permitting housing to be built will make life better for New Yorkers in the sense of easing the rent burdens on many people, as well as allowing new neighbors to live in New York, to enjoy all the benefits that New York has, and to contribute to our city. Thanks for letting me speak today.
Yes, thank you. Joseph O'Rourke.
Hello. Just a quick one. I understand. I think there's a need for housing, but in the past 10 years, whole blocks have been ripped down, and we put up these buildings that are being warehoused. I have one, the Kent, very close to me. There's not a light been on there for the last 2 years. I don't know who looked on Street Easy, but the apartments are bought at a very high rate, but no one's living there. So we've torn down tons of blocks to put up these houses and no one's living there. It's pretty insane. Another thing too, if we're going to do this housing, I think we have to look at the historic areas as well. This is, it's definitely sort of, we're looking at definitely a white population. And I think we're not touching these areas that are very low. I think we should look at building houses there as well. If we're going to look at exploring building houses on 2nd, 3rd, and 1st Avenue, I think we should look at Madison and Park and so forth as well. I saw that there was a 450-foot tower that was planned for Park and 77th that all of a sudden just went away. There was no talk about it after about 2 weeks that it was up for a proposal. So I think there's a study out by the NAACP and the some other think tank just about these historic areas and how they're truly sort of white specialized areas. I think we should look and make everything sort of across the board, make everything fair. I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. I think we could also find lots of minority, majority historic districts, Strivers Row, for example, in Harlem, which are severely underbuilt to their current zoning, let alone more housing. And so I'm not sure that that argument really makes any sense at all to me personally. And I also think that just sort of beyond that, I think Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue, Madison, for the most part, are pretty. Park Avenue for sure is pretty densely built and pretty tall on average, but that's I guess just me. Stephanie Reckler.
Hi, Anthony. I represent the Committee to Protect Our Lenox Hill Neighborhood with the Northwell proposal to construct a 434-foot tower on Lenox Hill, on the site of Lenox Hill Hospital currently. How does the city of Yes affect us in our opposition to this horrendous insult on our neighborhood? It is not needed. It is not wanted. There are other areas of the city that do need hospitals. Anthony, how does this affect us in our opposition?
Unfortunately, my instinct is it will make it even easier for Lenox Hill to to destroy our community. And to Joseph O'Rourke's point about the tower that just disappeared, one could cynically say that the tower, which had been part of the Lenox Hill proposal, disappeared as a kind of what's the right word? It disappeared because it was never seriously considered, and it was just a sort of give back to the community. Oh, look, we got rid of the tall residential tower on Park Avenue. Look at how good we're being. But that is a kind of cynical approach to it. I'm not sure it affects hospitals specifically, Stephanie, but I think that it's a kind of it's a kind of indication of the general attitude of the city government towards development, that any development is good and anything resisting any kind of development is bad. But that's again, it's a little unclear how the specific proposals in specific portions of the proposals will affect something like a hospital. It's a sort of medical research maybe, but it's a little hard to tell.
Okay, thank you.
At least with as much information as we have so far. And I think I've got Andrew Fine.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the time. I would just like to say that I don't think there should ever be any like carte blanche rezoning that excludes community input. That's what we're all here for. And I think the City of Yes thing is just like a general override that ignores the community input. And I'd really, really like to preserve this process where we all have a say and we're not just steamrolled and overridden. And I feel like our local government has kind of figured out more and more ways to steamroll and override public opinion, much like many of things that are going on right now, like the casino proposals and all that. Like, we don't need casinos. That's an answer. Where were we going to put them? Nowhere. Anyway, so I'm just siding on the side of community input on all of these decisions and not a carte blanche override of current zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And it's not so much, it's not solely, I think, a community input. It's also for the community to have a real say in some of these proposals. And while I think that one of the things that we've talked about a lot over the years is that new citywide rules don't always have the same collateral effects in different parts of the city. And I think that by cutting out the community boards for a lot of these decisions it exacerbates those different outcomes. That's Andrew. Well, I think, at least for the moment, we're going to go to the board, and then I'll come back to you, Elaine. So we're going to go to the board, and we'll come back to Elaine, and somebody else had a hand raised at one point. So let's start with Michelle. I'll come back to you, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Anthony. First, let me say this. The City of Yes proposal is over 400 pages. What you're talking about here, you're mentioning housing. It's a rhetorical question, but I somehow doubt that the people who spoke with a blanket affirmation of affordable housing really knows exactly what is being proposed in order to, and with the intent, somebody used that word, correct word, it's the intent to get affordable housing. I read most of it, others on this call did. You could punch a lot of holes in what they are proposing and argue that, in fact, it will not necessarily create affordable housing. And to the point of community, then I have my own comment, but I want to address what some of the community members said. In terms of community, Gail Brewer put out a big paper about how she wants communities, in essence, to determine their own fate. This is a prime example of what we should do. And in order to do that, this committee, I believe, needs to meet with housing separately, small business separately, environment separately, because in those 400 pages, there are a lot of effects not necessarily intended. So I caution you to just come out and say, yes, we want affordable housing, because the real way to get affordable housing is not without height limits, which is what this city believes, but it's with height limits. If you note the tall buildings, Adam is fainting over my comment, but if you look at the tall buildings that are being built, they are low density buildings. The building can be 40 stories, and I refer to a story as 10 feet. So it could be 400 stories, and it's got 2 apartments on a floor. And we have seen this, and Marco has done a study. He has documented this with all of the buildings in our area. They are all low density buildings, and to get them, they tore down affordable housing. The tenements, we call it tenements, it's an architectural term, it's not a degrading term. Many of them are quite nice, and their residents were quite happy living in them. They have been upgraded, and many, many people like them and were forced to relocate. So I also want to say that a lot of people make the comment that, well, the zoning resolution is really old, and as though that were the reason, that's enough reason to get rid of it. Well, I would suggest that all the people on this call consider some of the very old documents that rule their lives. Many of them, government level, religious level, anything you can think of. Those old documents, we wouldn't toss them away so quickly. They are to be valued. And while I'm not claiming that the current zoning resolution is perfect, I'm not saying it couldn't be tweaked, but the arrogance to take the entire zoning resolution of the entire city of New York and just throw it up in the air and change it. It is a very arrogant thing to do, and it is not a one size fits all. There are many different reasons for things being in many different neighborhoods, and it is absolutely inexcusable that it was done in this overhauling way, being so broad, all these pages, and then just throwing it up for brief commentary. I want to mention the historic districts. We're a very young country. We don't have the Colosseum. We don't have the Parthenon. We have our old buildings, the buildings from the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. Don't be so cavalier to just think that you can overbuild or do anything without major consideration and approval and just jump into those districts. And your assumption about the composition of the ones on the Upper East Side was arrogant as well. And there are historic districts in every one of the 5 boroughs, and they represent communities of all different kinds. So I would go back and rethink, what you're saying. The other thing is, it does not address the reason for affordable housing, for such an extravagant need for affordable housing. You need 500,000 this year. You'll need 600,000 next year. You'll need 700,000 the following year, because nobody is addressing, in addition to providing more affordable housing, nobody is addressing the real cause of affordable housing, and therein lies the rub. So, it's a little bit sinister, and this resolution requires a deep dive. Don't think that you can just say that's something you would like to see, and in fact, that comes to pass in this document. I'll give you an example. For example, people buy single-family homes in areas that are zoned for single-family homes. They have an expectation of a certain amount of land that they've purchased. They think that they have an expectation of a certain distance from their private home to another private home. In this proposal, it allows that single-family home to build another little home on their land. And as a matter of fact, if you saw the paper today, the government is going to give them upwards of $300,000 if they qualify to build these houses. So the government is giving a private owner money to build on this land. Well, what does the next door neighbor think? And also the assumption is that it will be for a family member, either a child, elderly parents. Yeah. But that's not going to be, that stipulation is not required. They don't know if it'll be used for an Airbnb, if it'll be used for any other kind of rental or any other kind of use. They have no idea. So that's just one little thing that imposes on others that is thrown into this. And this is not to mention the commercial that will be permitted in mid buildings, not just the second floor with street access, but that you can have an office or even a small factory on a floor in the middle of a residential building. So I could go on and on and on, which I probably already have, but I have to say, I think I made some good points. I caution you all to just not be so cavalier. I hope we do, as a committee and as a board, respect Gail Brewer's proposal on community input and take her up on that. And I hope you all plow through this if you're so sure about your point of view, and then see what you come up with. Anyway, I've said enough. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Michelle. Excellent as always. And I think now this is not all of the little parts of the proposal. All of them are not bad, and most of them aren't even bad ideas. I think the problem with many of these proposals is that it's easy for us to imagine their misuse and disasters that will come from them. I think there's been a strong movement in city planning over a great number of years to alter the use groups and the way that use groups are defined, that begin to speak to more to the difference between 1960 and 2030. And I think that's an effort that's really important and begins to clarify some of the problems that we've had in our community district, like the definition of supportive housing versus shelters, and sort of what constitutes a hotel or a short-time residence. All of those things that really didn't exist in 1960, and now the lack of clarity of the zoning resolution really hurts us in that way. Alita.
Thank you. And thank you for taking this on. In terms of the small business one, I just want to say that there was an issue on Lexington and 85th Street several years ago where there was an intent to turn a whole floor into kind of a drinking establishment for private school parents. And someone on this community board who had once lived in that building testified about the size, or spoke rather about the size of the elevator and access, and people were concerned about security. That seems to be something that has not been given enough attention in the proposal on economic opportunity. That there are plenty of issues with that. There are plenty of issues with the housing. I'd like to say a few general things and then more specifically. When I was chair of the community board, one chair previous to this one, Russell, I had attended a press conference that Scott Stringer, who was then controller, held. He counted 1,000 pieces of city-owned land that were suitable to build affordable housing. The city came back and he was surprised at how high the number was, saying, no, it's not 1,000, it's actually 600. He was astonished that the city said 600. 600 pieces of land with which the city could partner, on which the city could partner with affordable housing builders and get affordable housing built. Has the city done it? No, they haven't. They have failed miserably in creating and allowing affordable housing to exist, to be constructed, and to remain because of the ability of developers to tear down, as Michelle referred it, the tenements. Instead of partnering with affordable housing developers, not-for-profits, they turned everything over to for-profit developers. Mitchell-Lama is no longer affordable, and affordable doesn't have to be low income. It could be for the nurses, the teachers, the secretaries, the bus drivers, the cops, the firemen, all of the people who are not sitting on Wall Street, not earning tons of money, and not the lowest income either, because they can't afford it. But Mitchell-Lama is no longer affordable because it's all market rate. The city has just done an abysmal job, and instead they turn it over for-profit housing developers. The reason the building is empty is that it's probably priced for foreign investors, and they don't live here because this is what, their second, fifth, seventh house that they invest in for real estate. What damage does it do to the neighborhood? Because even if they're not using infrastructure such as electricity and riding in cabs because the building isn't occupied, the people who work there have to get there. The lights have to be on, the swimming pool has to be heated, the refrigerators for fresh direct deliveries have to be cooled, and there is already a burden on the electric and other infrastructure that we have in the neighborhood. An example of upzoning, there are a couple of examples of upzoning and how they have failed in providing for people. The upzoning, they haven't been built yet, but in Soho, the city has allowed developers to tear down senior housing in Chinatown in order to put up taller buildings with only 25 or 30% affordable housing, meaning that 70% is market rate. So the excuse to increase diversity doesn't really make sense when you think that by now building and bringing in 70% of wealthy people, they're actually decreasing diversity. But that I digress. So they are tearing down affordable housing for seniors to put up these market rate buildings. They're rebranding it something like Soho East. In East Harlem, Gail Brewer, when she was the borough president and I was attending borough board meetings, talked about how developers made all kinds of promises to get an upzoning there. But when it came push to dish, whatever the expression is, they failed to do what they promised and they were trying to get out of it. And we have seen this many, many times. This is a gift to developers. And I'd like to remind everyone that if you know, and if you don't know, it's the most recent I read, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that the New York Times reported the mayor's fundraising campaign for his reelection, and we all know that he's very engaged in fundraising. Most of that money has come from out-of-town real estate developers and casinos. So connect the dots. This is a gift. It is not going to build what we think it's going to build. And all you have to do is look at the numbers that Michelle alluded to for the affordable housing units that have been lost on the Upper East Side with this tall construction. And I remember attending a borough board meeting, and CB4 talked about how, because there was a height limit, they were able to get from the developer more affordable housing units because they were able to say yes or no. When there is unlimited height, we have no ability to say no, and therefore they have no desire to put in affordable housing units. Rather than building, and all of these tall buildings have not added affordable housing to the Upper East Side. Instead, they've decreased it by tearing down the tenements. So where is rent gone with all of the construction? Where has the ability of people to live here gone for people who've stayed in their homes? It just doesn't exist anymore because the government doesn't do what it's supposed to do, which is either allow not-for-profit developers to build or build it itself. And even though we're not Paris, in reading an article about rents and construction and development in Paris, they said you cannot allow for-profit developers to just build because they're only interested in profit. The city has to take on responsibility itself, and we're not seeing that at all. So I think that's all I have to. I know I'm forgetting some stuff, but I've gone on my podium for a really long time. Oh, and one more thing. When I was chair, I put together with other community boards, including CB10 in Harlem and CB6 in Midtown and CB7 on the West Side and CB1 in the financial district. We put on programs on the effect of economic gentrification, which is what you have when you see all of these tall buildings on Madison Avenue, on 3rd Avenue, on 2nd Avenue, and people coming in have a lot more money than the housing that they've torn down. There is increased economic security for the people who live in the tenements, wondering if the real estate pressures on pricing is going to force a sale of their building and they'll be forced out. There are changes in the schools because people come in and they take over schools, meaning that the catchment shrinks in order to be able to support people. There is health insecurity when medical clinics are forced to, affordable medical clinics are forced to leave. There are pressures on small business, and the city should be considering other ways to help small businesses. Its City of Yes is not going to do what it says it wants because, again, it's a gift to developers. So I just ask that for everyone who supports affordable housing, and we all do, that the nuances and the details be examined, because you can't just say build affordable housing to a for-profit developer and expect that it's going to be done. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience, and happy holidays. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Alita. Two things that have come out so far that are will be questions in one sort or another to city planning, and that is one is that how do the City of Yes proposals, or how will the City of Yes proposals, if adopted, affect the relationship between the zoning resolution and the building code? One of the reasons why commercial businesses and small factories aren't allowed in the middle of residential buildings is that it poses us a life safety hazard to the inhabitants. And that's traditionally why. And so it's a question that these proposals may be very nice, may make a lot of sense, and because of their inapplicability, wrong word maybe, or I made it up, to the building code, may in fact, or at least hopefully, would then be moot. But anyway, it's a question. And another question which affects virtually every conversation we have is, what is affordable housing? Is affordable housing strictly the affordable housing as defined by HUD, which is based on AMI, or area median income? Or is there something else that we would generally call affordable that would be, well, Michelle used the very good example of the tenements, or our currently dwindling stock of rent stabilized and rent controlled apartments. And so I think that in conversations with some of the people at city planning, they like to hew to that very small, that 20% of HUD defined affordable housing, rather than also including all of those other housing units, which are, while technically not affordable under HUD's rules, are certainly more affordable than new market rate housing. But it's a question. Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate your summarizing for questions for city planning coming out of this evening. I think we also should think about what is our role in a community board response as a committee. And I know ultimately that this will be subject to a vote by the full board, but I think it would be very useful to use this time to identify some particular suggestions for components of a resolution, or fixes to, things that, if City of Yes would adopt X, would address some of the issues. And I would also like to pick up on what Michelle was saying about, this is really, I think assessing this is really about what are the unintended consequences of some of these regulations. And I think we have to get into very specifics to both identify what those are and to brainstorm or propose potential solutions. So I am going to modestly suggest two. The first is, I think there is a real unintended consequence of the allowing second floor retail in commercial corridors. I'm with Elaine on this, that while I did ask this question at the City of Yes proposal in front of the full board, and we got an answer from the city planning staff that no, this does not change the FAR that is allowed to be used for commercial versus residential. I want to suggest that the City of Yes proposal has to clarify that if second floor residential space gets converted to commercial, that there must be a concomitant conversion from commercial to residential somewhere else in the building, that there has to be a mechanism to determine that the total FAR devoted to commercial does not exceed the zone capacity, and that there is not, as an unintended consequence of making second floor retail as of right, that there is no loss of residential housing, and there needs to be very specific safeguards. Their response when I asked this question in the full board meeting was, well, this is really intended for new development as opposed to repurposing. But the difference between their intent and how people interpret and how it gets enforced is broad. So I would love to see and suggest that we include in our recommendations, in our, here, whereas, things that we would like to see improved or changed about the proposal, there needs to be clarification that second floor retail as of right does not allow for a greater percentage of retail or commercial in the building as a whole, and the balance must be maintained. So that is my first concrete suggestion. My second is the fear that multiple members of the community board have expressed in various meetings, including this one, about the fact that we are seeing buildings get demolished, buildings with a much greater FAR getting built in their place, but with no increase in density, no increase in the actual number of units. And I think there needs to be some sort of, since City of Yes basically gives everybody a 20% bonus on FAR, there should be some stipulations that 20% bonus on FAR only applies if the total number of units increases proportionately to the increase in total floor area built, or some formula that basically says you only get the bonus if you're building many more units than you are taking away in the process. I don't know how to phrase that, and perhaps other people can take up that cause and cudgel, but I totally wholeheartedly believe we need more housing units. And part of the way we need to get there is we need to place restrictions on the units that get built. There needs to be things that require volume. And so that is my second substantive suggestion for City of Yes, that, either you only get to use that 20% housing bonus if the number of units is, some formula that, average square footage can be no more than X, or no total number of units built has to be the number of units that are torn down times Y. Somebody come up with something that would make sense. Now, those are two. There are 19 proposals in City of Yes. How do we organize to look at each of them and say, what is the unintended consequence of this particular proposal? How can we assign each of these proposed, groupings out to a member of this committee or to members of the board for people to go back and say, here's what I think the unintended consequences here and how it would affect CB8. And then we can talk about possible solutions.
Elizabeth, if you don't mind me jumping in really quickly, just because I know the programming and schedule of the board, and most do not. So we have basically until the end of January to issue our comments to the Department of City Planning. They've already sent us all a letter saying that they're going to accept comments all the way through January. So what we've already planned also is that we are going to have this on our agenda, both at the upcoming land use and full board meeting in December, but also at a land use meeting in January as well. And we're going to actually divide the topic areas up for the public hearing into sections like you've talked about. You remember they had 4 different groups. We're going to do a couple of groups at one, a couple of groups at another, and we may even still have more time to like discuss them even at full board. I don't know if Valerie's here because I spoke to her about it, but so I want everybody to know that there is going to be ample amount of time for hearings and discussion, and there's Valerie, for us to opine and break into each of the different little aspects too.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, I was trying to get in by phone. Well, I can't get in by phone. Yeah, I mean, obviously we want the discussion to continue, but I'm happy that Elizabeth is taking it in more concrete, what we're going to do.
Mhm.
And we do want to leave enough time to speak about all the different proposals. So as Will said, that's the schedule we're going to try to follow. So I'm sorry, I can't even talk. I'm fairly ill, but that is what we're going to do. And so I appreciate everyone's commentary and thinking towards how we'll be sending something out in the next week as to how we're going to tackle it vis-a-vis the different proposals and what suggestions, and to try to come up with suggestions for each of the 4 aspects of the program and to make them as specific as possible, because that is how that's how we'll get something done. Just a general, I think, no, or a general yes is not going to be very helpful and not going to meet with any positive reaction. I know that many community boards in Queens have all turned down the city of yes. So the borough of Queens is turning out to be the borough of no. So that's a strategy. I don't know. I mean, I haven't been in any of the borough board meetings. I don't know what Manhattan has discussed, but I do know that I think you get a better reaction with specific proposals. And I think most of the commentary tonight has been positively focused that way. And basically focusing in on what does this mean for our community and how we can make it better. And I think we are a community of yes. We just want to make sure that what has adversely impacted in our experience with essentially, as of right development has not really got us any affordable housing. It's basically resulted in destruction of affordable housing. So we need to address that. I think I've spoken enough. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, other committees will also be able to put this on their agenda and discuss just like this committee has.
Right.
I think, and thank you, Elizabeth. I think one of the interesting aspects of the that related to your second suggestion is that the mechanism proposed to get more units is to make units smaller, which don't necessarily benefit people who need affordable housing. And I think that I agree with you that some way of crafting that extra 20% for more units is absolutely appropriate, because I'm not sure how to, offhand, I'm not sure how to do it, but I think that I think is a proposal that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, could it be
Go ahead.
just as simple as if you're going to benefit from a 20% increase in FAR, you need to generate at least 20% more units than previously existed at a minimum. You know, I do think at some
I understand
point
that.
there
I
does
understand
need
that
to be
that
some
sort of
restriction. But yeah.
that sounds it. Yes, that sounds good. I can't quite think of intuitively. I know there is some kind of bad outcome that can come from that, but I can't quite put my finger on it yet. But I promise I'll send you an email when I do. Next, Rita. Rita has stepped away. Yes, she was sitting there, but she has stepped away. I'm going to call on Elaine again. And when Rita reappears, we'll call on Rita.
Thank you. A couple of comments. One, for those, the Park Avenue 77th Street site was pulled as a housing development because with the rezoning, they would have had to put in MIH and be affordable. Therefore, they didn't have a developer who was going to buy into that. So that's why that kind of disappeared. The other piece I wanted, and listening, and Michelle, Alita, Elizabeth, everybody, the whole issue of affordable, I think, is the wrong terminology. It's called workforce housing. That's what we're looking for. And we need to move away from the affordable, quote unquote, housing. Out in the suburbs and some of the rural areas, they don't use affordable. It's workforce housing, and it seems to do better. One of the issues for workforce housing is the affordability of the land. And this is what was said previously. A leader stated it. We need to look at the city property in our community, which is limited. It's all over at the public housing sites. And we need to look at that and build in there workforce housing, not the rich development that was previously recommended and overstated. So there's a lot to be said. 87th Street North was urban renewal. Most people don't know that. That's where you got the whole Rupert Towers construction, etc. Because the city created urban renewal. Maybe we need to do eminent domain on some of the properties. It's not going to happen, I know, Marco, but we need to look at how do you get developers who would be willing to work to build workforce housing. Historically, when we look at communities, Rome, Greece, whatever, the wealthy were able to be forgiven on taxes, etc., because what they did was have buildings named for them, and they liked this. So maybe we need to begin to go back historically and look at what could we do to entice the wealthy who now have forgotten the community to join us. I think what was said earlier, the empty buildings, absolutely they're empty. I go up and down the avenues, nobody's in there, and I will deal with an issue on 83rd and 3rd. They got a double cut on the sidewalk on a side street on 83rd. You approved that? Wow, you did? Wow. What did you get for that cut? All right. But let's look historically what we could do to engage the wealthy in not only our city, but our nation and in our community. We do have people who are very wealthy who might be interested in participating in an affordable workforce housing, and give them the visibility for what they contribute to us. I mean, I'm trying to look at what we can do to make things work, because the city administration ain't going to help us. We are overdeveloped. And for those of you who are, I'm native born, so I'm going to tell you this into the neighborhood. Born and raised in Yorkville on 86th Street. People moving in now complain about, oh, we can't live here, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? The issue is not taking away, but developing and creating opportunity. My parents during the recession, whatever it was in the 30s and whatever, moved every time the rent was due. Okay? That was the way life was in New York. It is very similar today, sadly. Okay? I'm better off than my parents were. Yes, I am. But there are so many who are not. And we need to look at how we help them. And it's not all about just rezoning. It's about rezoning with a purpose. Oh, Elizabeth, I was born at Lenox Hill Hospital, Upper East Side. Thank you. The issue really is, how do we have a community where you can live, afford to live here, be able to participate in the local stores? What's a community? The city of Yes does not provide it. Let's be honest. You know, I can understand that Queens has said no. Absolutely, because it violates their way of life that they moved to. They may have been in a tenement in Manhattan on the Lower East Side, and they moved to Queens to better themselves. They did not want high rises, although I think some of them would take it if they were done in a decent way. High rises on the suburbs, the other boroughs, are going to be as expensive as they are here. Who's kidding who? So we need to look at, and I'm glad, Valerie, you're going to have all these little meetings, but let me say to you, you need to keep remembering we have a limited space. We've allowed for development with no commitment to community. And the last time we did was urban renewal. And maybe we need to look at, what do we go back to? And Elizabeth, I love the balance off. And I think what's important there is, remember POPs, publicly owned private spaces. Developers could build up, but we would have a little space on the street. Guess what? It's not open. I did the study with Terry Slater years ago. I have the report. And I just walked by another one today and said, God damn it, it's not ADA. I could redesign. Craig probably could. He's a planner, although he's not a physical planner. But Anthony could help me redesign a pathway to get a wheelchair up there. Don't think letting the city say something gives us enforcement, because our city does not enforce anything. And the POPs is a prime example. And I can't support that. And I'd be glad to go on I think Community Board 8 may still have the study up there. Who knows? But, you know, don't be so naive. They don't care about our community. They want to push us down and say we are not good people, which is wrong. And I'm tired of hearing those expressions, because we are. We do care. We've looked where we could build, and everything has been taken away because of a variance or this or that. And so all I ask you people as community board members is, as you're working on this, think of the unintended consequences. Elizabeth, you're so right. There are so many that happen. Look what happened with the Blood Center, or what's it called, Longfellow. They're not building there, but they changed the zoning, and somebody's going to benefit from that, because I can't find where it says it reverts to R8B. You gave away the store. You can't give away the store. We are the most taxed but most responsible community in this city, and we care about everybody else. But don't screw us. is what I say to you all. And please work to get this done, okay? Good luck to you as a former
Thank you,
member.
Elaine.
Thank
you, Elaine. Okay, now we have Rita. We're gonna have Rita, Marco, and oops, Adam disappeared. Adam was here a minute ago. Okay. Oh, there he is.
I just want to say that Alita said it all, and she said it very eloquently, and I agree with it. And you know that I have my Mitalama podium right here because it was the most successful development project ever. So that's a good reason not to repeat it because it was so successful. In Brooklyn, because a neighbor of mine who gets a newspaper where they have apartments for rent, have all these developments in Brooklyn, it's in East New York. Well, we all know that East New York is not a prime neighborhood, but there are different developers, and every building is 100% affordable. And the AMI, the top AMI, is 100%. My question to this elite group is, why don't we ever have that developer in and ask them, how are you doing it? I mean, they're not losing money. They're not doing this for charity. How come we never ask them? My question is, do you think it would be valid to have some of these developers who are producing 100% affordable housing in the outer boroughs, how they are doing it? That's my question.
Thank you, Rita. That's a good question. Next we have, it looks like, well, Marco was off and back. It looks as though we have Adam next.
The only, I have much to say, but the only comment I'd like to bring up now is that the claim that the development that's happening in the neighborhood is all for-profit developers all seeking to maximize profit, and the development now is generally geared towards condominiums. If the 421A tax abatement were to be brought back, you would see a rash of rental development happening in the neighborhood. You can look at some of the projects that are ongoing in the neighborhood and their 421A rental projects. You can look at the corner of 78th and 1st, the two projects on 2nd Avenue and 83rd Street. Those are both mixed income rental developments. If we were to have some guts in the legislature and bring back 421A, I think you would see substantial rental housing, mixed income rental housing development. That's all for now.
Thank you, Adam. Good comment. Next we have Craig.
Hi, good evening, everyone. First, I want to just start off with an analogy from my transportation world. So in recent years, and this has happened recently in Queens, and will soon be happening in Manhattan, and this has been taking place actually in all the 5 boroughs, bus network redesigns have been commonplace. And the reason for them is very similar to, I think, what we're seeing here with the city of Yes, and that is that development patterns and commuting patterns change over time, and bus networks need to adapt to them because in many cases, bus networks were developed 50, 60 plus years ago. And such redesigns are often viewed skeptically initially, and that's because changes proposed can sometimes be perceived as being very significant, and it's going to be perceived as potentially upending people's commutes and their routines. But at the end of the day, especially if you have good public participation that generates and helps shapes comments and suggestions that can get incorporated into a final plan, ultimately these things actually have a great track record of being very successful once they're implemented. And not only successful, just looking at key performance indicators, but from the perspective of bus passengers as well, because they end up making their lives better, whether it be through faster trips, increased service, more reliability, so on and so forth. And I view the City of Yes proposal in a similar vein. And there's a lot in here. It's a very ambitious plan. It's not perfect. I think there have been some salient points that have been raised tonight. But at the same time, it's really long overdue. And I think the city is sincere in framing this as a desperately needed updating of the zoning resolution, because here we are 62 years removed from 1961. And we've come a long way, and I think we need to adapt as a city. So I think it's important that we consider that in a broad sense, this is a plan that really does have great potential to address the city's needs as it prepares for future growth. And we choose to live here either because of or despite of the density, and we need to share the burden and accept that this proposal will likely result in growth in our community, just as it will in other communities, and probably in a much more significant way, because in this community, we could absorb that growth with little difficulty. So I look forward to additional discussion at upcoming committee meetings and land use meetings to hopefully address some of those concerns that have been raised to hopefully improve this proposal. But let's also be careful not to be oppositional because we're afraid of development. It will just result in our comments being discounted or discarded. And then on a separate note, I just want to respectfully request that hopefully in future meetings, that if a statement is made in which a chair moderating a meeting doesn't agree, that the chair step aside if they wish to comment on it. I think it's not to the public benefit when a chair rebuts statements from the public and board members if they don't conform to a chair's view. The role of the chair is to moderate in a neutral manner and not to impose their views on the attendees of a meeting, and I hope we can keep to that practice going forward. Thank you very much.
Well, I have no comment as chairman, but as a private individual member of the community board, I would like to say that revisions to well, I have two things to say. I think I agree with you, Craig, that revisions to, I believe it or not, I agree with you, Craig, that revisions to the zoning resolution are long overdue, long overdue. I would argue, as an individual and as a professional engaged in these activities, that we are still nibbling around the edges, and that if we really want to make this a better city, we should look at a complete overhaul of the zoning resolution and the way that we look at everything about the city. But that's another conversation for another time. Marco.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm going to make 3 comments about what he's been saying, and then I'm going to pinpoint exactly my points. The first one is, we are running late because there are 3 very important areas: sustainability, housing, and commercial. Each of them require at least 3 meetings in order to reach a conclusions. It's not 10 minutes like the before we did in the meeting of land use. I think it's wrong. We need to go deeper to discuss each of them. We are not against new development. We support development. We support actually to make sense. So this is the first point. The second point that I had to raise is about Elizabeth Rose. Elizabeth Rose, she is raising the issue of the second floor commercial space. Look, it's very simple, that issue. You, Anthony knows very well as an architect, when you have a project and you do the calculations, you see what the zoning resolutions allows you to put commercial. In C19, they allow the floor area ratio maximum of 2. So if the total floor area is 10 for R10, so 2 is for commercial, whatever you use it in the way that best you fit. And the 8 will be for housing. Simple. So this is what it is right now. The big issue become when you have to be in compliance with the building code, compliance with the American Disability Act. That is kind of become an issue. But we have to analyze those points, because if you want to be accessible for everybody, you have to make available for everybody. In new buildings is probably much easier because they have elevators and it's easier to comply. But for existing buildings, not. And that is the case, probably, Elizabeth, you should be aware that we have an issue that you described, and that's what you're fighting for, is the Second Delhi Avenue restaurant. That was, I think, is in 74 and Second Avenue. It's a corner street. The landlord, what he did is basically he claimed that nobody want to rent that apartment, and therefore he wants to put the commercial space. I think that is your issue. We are losing right there one affordable housing because the landlord basically what he's saying is, I don't want to rent to a low income housing because I make more money in commercial business. Simple. So this is the case that I think you try to communicate, and the lady from city planning, she's running around different issues, argue without no common sense. The third issue is about, yes, I agree, transportation is the main issue, and I think I applaud that this plan running in that direction. That is a very good idea. But we are not afraid of the development. On the contrary, we support development. We believe in development, but we cannot accept that Northern Boulevard, a wide street, wider than Park Avenue, have a 2-story buildings. Park Avenue have 15 or 14-story building, so they have more density. And they pinpoint everybody to Park Avenue. Park Avenue, Northern Boulevard is 2-story buildings, and they are unwilling. By the way, all the trains are running right there. So if it's transitory, this is the right place to increase development. This is the right place to move forward. So now, let me go to what somebody said. We had to follow what the markings is saying. It's easier to speak, to give ideas, and to be demagogue. But let's go make numbers. With numbers, we can establish the issue. In 2019, HPD declared that it has 1.1 million of applicants for lottery housing. So having this number, and Mayor de Blasio claimed that he built 140,000 dwelling units, the only he contributed is 12%. So then this is the deficit, and that is why we have the market value in Manhattan, according with the borough president, $5,400, because the supply is not match the demand. See, so in other words, the demand is huge when you have that number. So that means that what it is right here is we are fighting to reduce that number. Why? Because most of the income goes to housing. In some cases, will go even 50%. That means those people that probably they don't eat, probably they have to do anything other thing, or maybe they don't pay the rent and then become homeless. So the issue become a very social issue, very complex. So let me talk about a little bit deeper of the deficit. My finding is around the 700 dwelling units is the deficit approximately. Probably is even much bigger. But Mayor de Blasio, about 1 year ago, he came yelling, saying that he's going to build 500,000 affordable units. Now, recently, he's claiming that he's going to build only 100,000 affordable units. Why? Because he knows very well there is not enough money to cover that number. There is no technology to build in that period of time. These two things doesn't match at all. So analyze the city of Yes. Let's go make concrete analysis of the city of Yes. In RAB, what they are proposing is next. For my point of view, they propose to reduce affordable housing. Through increased tenant harassment, therefore increasing gentrification, and then to build only luxury housing. The example that there is in the city of Yes is next. They said in a vacant lot, clearly I had to say vacant lot, 100 by 100, they said they can put 56 market rate units and 11 affordable units. Now, we don't have in the Upper East Side vacant lots. So if we have, I took one example in the Upper East Side, 4 lots, 25 by 25, so it combines 100 by 100. What's going to happen? It has 72 affordable units right there. So what's going to happen is the landlord is going to see, look, I'm going to make more money. I'm going to harass the tenants. I'm going to vacate the building, and I'm going to build 56 market rate affordable housing, and I'm sorry, market rate, and only affordable housing. Now, let's go talk about affordable housing. And that is in relation with my study that I did in the Upper East Side with 12 buildings. What happened is, the problem is not the density, the maximum density. The problem is the developer, they build just only between 25 to 50% of the density. So that means rather to build, and let me bring that example. I think Craig said in one of the project that came to the community board and to his committee Park in Madison and 79th Street. He said clearly, this building that want to move the bus stop has just only 16 dwelling units. So that's what it is. That's what they're building right now, the developers. Look, I'm not in disagreement to build luxury housing. The only thing I disagree is they had to increase affordable housing. It has to increase middle income housing, because all of us belong to the community, and all of us, we need to be served. We have to stop demolishing affordable housing. My finding is, for every new affordable housing that we build, 9 affordable housing we demolish. If we maintain this trend, the only thing we do is gentrification, and we push people from our community out. So the city of Yes doesn't address the issue of that part. The other issue that the city of Yes is raising is they saying, oh, you know what's the problem? The housing factor. The housing factor is 680 square feet, 680. That is for R6 to R10. So if they said, oh, if we reduce from 650 to 550, we have more units. That is true. But the developer, they don't build 100% of the density. They build less than 50 or maybe 25%. In the case of the owner of the building at 79 and First Avenue, he demolished 79 dwelling units, and he built 0 luxury, 0 affordable, because he put a community facility. So that is the trend in our community is happening. Finally, let me go to the other issue that they're saying, that they create also a regulation that's saying that for any irregular lot, they can increase the height to 350 or 360. I'm not sure the number, but this is in that number, in that range, because they want to incentivize to build in that part. In our community, we don't have this kind of the lots, but the developers, they can figure it out easily. They can buy one lot that create some irregularity in the zoning development, and then they have an irregular lot, and they can go 340, 350 feet tall buildings with low density luxury housing. So the city of Yes, what it does is create just only luxury housing and demolish middle income housing and low income housing. Therefore, they gentrificate our neighborhood. I think that is the point, and we need to keep discussing this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Very good point. Just by way of example, again, sorry. The building I live in is about built in 1928. It's about 43,000 square feet. Excuse me. And there are 60 apartments. So they average about 700 square feet each. Most market rate one bedrooms are around 1,000 square feet. And even if you add the 20% for affordable housing, you have, if you tear this building down and build a new building with average market rate and 8 affordable units, you end up with approximately 50 units at maximum. So I think Marco's point about the minimum apartment size is a good one. We now, let's see, where are we? We have Boaz, Alida, and Michelle to speak again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I will make it very quick. It's getting late. So one, regarding the attack on the market rate, people that lives on the market rate. Again, I don't know what kind of world are you guys living, but I argue you to talk with the teachers of your kids, with the nurses, with the people that work in hospital, with the scientists. They all live in a market rate apartment, majority of them. I'm willing to bet the people that live in the affordable housing are usually in a very, a very low economical position. So that's regarding the market rate. I mean, we need more market rate in Upper East Side. It will help solve the housing crisis. That's one. But I did find a few common ground between the community board members and the public members. I don't know if you noticed, but the conversation started with the public members, regardless of what, I don't know if some of the community boards think that the public did not read the entire document or something like that, but the fact is that the majority of the public members that appeared in today's session support more housing, more market rate housing, more affordable housing. So, and I think that the community board in general are in favor of that. So that's one common ground that we need to make sure it's part of any future resolution regarding this. This is one. The second thing, I agree that we need to have some common sense if we're adding to the resolution where if they are tearing down buildings, that the new buildings will have more apartments, stuff like that, basic stuff like that. And regarding the commercial part, I'm okay. I don't understand the commercial part as well. I'm all in favor of switching the commercial part to a more housing units. I think this should be the #1 priority. Having more, maximize the number of units, available units in our community. And I actually agree with some of the community board members that say that what exactly is affordable housing? We should just say units, and please don't be against market rate units. It's not that the people that live in market, I live in market rate, I'm not rich. Yeah, listen, my wife working in hospital, it's like we are, most of our salary go to the rent, like all our friends. They are scientists that working in different hospitals, they are nurses. I mean, that's a situation. And we'll never be able to apply to affordable housing. It's just not our, salary bucket. As simple as that. Thank you very much for listening and for your consideration.
Thank you. Now we have Alida and Michelle, and then I think we have exhausted ourselves.
Actually, we do have a member of the public named Gary who's just struggling to raise his hand virtually, and he has not spoken yet.
Oh, okay. Excuse me, Alida and Michelle. Gary, please. I saw you waving, but I didn't know.
Great.
But
Maybe
I
your
can't
headset
hear
is
you.
muted, but we can't hear you at all. Nope, still can't hear you.
Nope.
Nope, still can't hear you. Do you have
No.
like a wired headphones plugged in or anything like that, maybe?
No, that's it.
We'll come back to you.
We'll come back to you if you can figure that out. Alita. Thank you, Will.
Thank you. And feel free to interrupt me. I'd like to point out the impact also on the loss of small businesses of all the construction that we've had. And small businesses contribute a lot to a neighborhood, to community, and should not be just dismissed. Second of all, there's a lot of information in the proposal that has to do with building on NYCHA property, and that needs a closer look because we averted a fiasco with the market rate building 50 stories on a side street that they wanted to do. But I think what they are trying to do, some of it's not bad, allowing stores onto NYCHA property, but also it just needs to be examined and looked at. The other point is that when developers need a gift of a 421A tax exemption, and my blood, maybe I do get emotional, I am passionate about things, but I'd walk by advertising for apartments for millions of dollars with no taxes for years and years, and that never seemed right, because if you could afford millions of dollars for an apartment, why can't you afford to pay taxes? What is the city and the state giving up in 421A? Why can't we use the money that we're getting from those taxes and put it into a fund to build affordable housing on city-owned land or on other land? Other cities impose things on developers. New York has been a magnet for real estate developers. Why can't we impose anything on them? Why can't we have a fund where a percentage, whatever it is, like a mansion tax of their properties, is put into a fund to build affordable housing in a way where they're not having to make more of a profit? It feels like it's one step forward for the city in terms of gaining affordable units, and two steps back in terms of how many units we lose, how much neighborhood character. And it does mean something to have a neighborhood of character, which every neighborhood was, until they all become identical, because the only real estate the only tenants that can afford the high prices in the real estate that goes with the tall developments. And you could look at Lower Fifth Avenue, you can look at Broadway on the west side, you can look at changes on the east side, are the chains and the large restaurants. And so you get a uniformity that doesn't attract people to neighborhoods. It doesn't attract visitors to neighborhoods. It doesn't attract businesses. And those are consequences as well as infrastructure and increased congestion from school buses and taxis and Ubers and cars and buses, while the city's pulling back on public transportation as well in certain areas. This is way, way, way too much to not only unpack, but to parse through and understand all of the consequences to the extent possible, and all of the consequences that are already written out, and to be able to do that in every neighborhood of the city, painting with this kind of broad brush at the same time that entities are to me, they're being given a windfall, because every time they put in affordable housing, they get to do more and more and more. Why are we the only neighborhood that you can't really see the sky unless you're standing in the middle of Second Avenue, in the street with the buses and the trucks? Why are other neighborhoods? It matters. This stuff matters. Yes, we need affordable housing, but it's in the gifts to developers. It's in the city not taking care of it themselves. And for the people who may not know what Mitchell-Lama housing was, it's all of Rupert Towers. Those were all affordable. And by affordable, it's middle income. And I grew up where both my parents worked for the city. And if we didn't have some kind of of subsidized or affordable housing, we wouldn't have been able to live here. And I would have missed the great advantages of growing up in New York, which is why I'm passionate about having affordable housing, but not where we give up our neighborhoods and our streets for $68 million apartment sales. It's just, there's something that's just wrong with the equations and with the sense that the for-profit builders have to get more than what they actually give, which, as Elaine alluded to in the POPs, is something that the city does all the time. It feels like every time there's a partnership between the city and for-profit, what do they call those things? Anyway, the public-private partnerships, the public loses and the private gains. And I will stop with that. Thank you so much for all the time.
Thank you, Alita. Michelle. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so I'm for workers' housing. I think that's what Elaine called it. But I also want to caution this committee. This is a free enterprise system. I'm interested in getting a solution. I'm not interested in totally changing the system. You do need a tax base. So you do need a level of, I'll call it luxury housing. But in fact, apartments like Boaz's is not luxury. But it's affordable for people like him and most of people in the city, and they too constitute a tax base. Very, very important. I want to offer something. Well, let me address Rita's question is why isn't Mitchell-Lama building here? And why can they do it there and be profitable and not here? Very simple, the cost of the land. You're not paying the same in East New York for a plot of land as you're paying in Midtown or anywhere in Manhattan. So their cost is not the same. I also want to say for everybody that you should go to the Housing Committee meeting this month. I had actually written to the co-chairs and asked if they could make a joint with zoning, because they are going to have a presentation by a group that specifically addresses the housing concerns in the city of Yes. And since we in this zoning committee were theoretically discussing the whole zoning issue, but the interests seem to be primarily in housing, I urge you all to go to the Housing Committee meeting. I don't know if it's this Thursday or next. I'm not quite sure. Look at the calendar, or maybe Will can jump in and tell us. The other thing is we have to be very careful that we're not going to lower standards. For example, for those of you who haven't read the over 400 pages of the City of Yes, did you know that one of the proposals is to have very small apartments with no bathrooms, with a bathroom in the hallway? Is this what we want? Is this where we're going? Back to the Lower East Side in the late 1800s? That to me is not progress. That to me is not offering something worthwhile to a population that needs some courtesies. That is not a solution. So again, for those of you, and right after my comments, one of you, I don't want to name names, espouted the general proposal of, yes, we all want affordable housing. No, you've got to go through this. You've got to look at this and say, I like affordable housing, but I don't want apartments to share a bathroom. And I don't want people to be forced to live in 500 square foot apartments. We're not animals, we're people. If somebody chooses to do that, that's great. But if that's now what you're mandating, that new construction be in order to get more housing in there, that's not a solution for me. So I think there are solutions. I think we need more housing that more people can afford. I think we have to say that our historic districts are precious. Be very careful with them. Don't jump on that bandwagon. And you have to be considerate of what it is they're actually proposing. And any resolution, I am not for a resolution, by the way, that says we want affordable housing, because the powers that be down at city planning will take that as a yes, that we now think this is a terrific proposal and you go ahead. By no means. I would like each of those things addressed. Or we don't have to have a total resolution. We can comment on housing with just suggestions, as Elizabeth suggested, and not come in. Like our resolution could be, we suggest the following: housing, blah, 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 sustainability, blah, 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 that kind of thing, and not come in with a blanket statement. But bear in mind, if you're really also interested in this, read it, and then you will see what you're dealing with. The old saying, the devil is in the details, and it certainly is in this case. But my last word, I really encourage you to go to the Housing Committee, because a lot of this might be clarified for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Good point. Were you about to say something, Will?
No, I was not, but we do have 2 housing committee meetings that are coming up at the end of this Wednesday, so tomorrow, and then next week on Monday, I believe. Yes, on the 4th.
Yeah, that sounds right. I knew there was one next week. Thank you.
Yeah, and it does appear that Gary has figured out his microphone situation.
Yes, Gary. But he has disappeared.
So there's that.
Come on back.
If I could have a little moment here, I won't take much time because it's getting late and a great deal has already been covered. But what we were really here for was to look at the adverse effects, zoning effects of the city of yes, and I think that the purpose of good zoning is to protect the quality of life of the residents, the livability of the neighborhood, and I think that the Community District 8, with the exception of 4 avenues, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and York, has been very well zoned. We've got R8B on the mid-blocks. We've got R10A and special districts on the wide crosstown streets and the other avenues. And I think that whatever we do, and I think the objectives of this city of yes are certainly supportable, but I think that it suffers from a lot of the problems that a lot of city proposals have, is they don't think of the consequences. My fellow Elizabeth has already pointed that out. And I think that they are adverse here. I think when they go through their proposals where there should be absolutely no increases in the height limits or the zoning envelopes of R8B or R10A. They're good, they were well done, and we should not consider them. We should not, where they create a height limit taller than 210 feet, I think that should be changed to 210 feet or less, because of they bring up the environmental damages in the first thing, and then they add to the building height that will cause environmental damages. And I think that the sliver law should never, ever be eliminated. I know I'm a bit prejudiced since I'm its mother, but it was so easy to pass years ago. They were perfectly hideous, and we haven't had, obviously, we haven't had any since. But it's on the wide streets that they're particularly dangerous, because if you have a row of low houses, you get this sore thumb sticking up in the middle. And there's absolutely nothing much to be gained by doing that. And I think another danger is expanding the area of zoning lot mergers and development rights transfers. You just get more density, more FAR illegal, and it increases the FAR in the receiving sites. So I just want to make sure that those, among other mistakes, are repaired before we go forward.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, well, we have Gary and then I think Rita to kind of close us out. Try again, Gary.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Phenomenal. We got it. All right. As I was trying to say before, since I pressed your time, I'm going to hurry it up. I want to say it's a pleasure meeting you all. It's my first time ever doing anything like this. I've been in Manhattan for a minute now, and it's interesting hearing you talk. So I don't have a whole lot of knowledge about the city and how things work and so on and so forth, but so people brought up some good points, the gentleman with the numbers and so on and so forth. I just want to say, well, we live in a country of like a lot of other countries that run on the deficit. Phenomenal. Okay, so it makes sense. The money's not there. Great. It's never there. We all live with some form of a deficit, it seems, right? Okay, so, but we work with what we got. So I think a lot of the things with, as far as affordable goes, is you have to define affordable. Okay, yeah, and there's a lot to go into it. We're going to speed up this. I'm not going to turn this into a debate or anything, but I think it's obvious if your goal is to create more apartments, then you need to utilize your square footage. And Manhattan being, any city being condensed, you have to utilize what you have, right? Okay, so down in Lower Manhattan, they had a couple of buildings there. It must have been the same property owner. I think it was absolutely brilliant how they decided to connect the two buildings and utilize that little bit of a triangle space that was just dead space. I think that was brilliant. It wasn't a huge dent. We're not talking about 100,000 apartments like a brand new building, but it was utilizing space properly. Okay, now bear with me on this thought process here. Okay, I'm a very creative and creative individual, and I wasn't born yesterday here, but I've been around, not a whole lot, but you go to Vegas and you see a bridge that goes over the sidewalk so to prevent accidents and to utilize space and to unclog traffic and so on and so forth. We're talking about business philosophies here of a bottleneck, okay? There's traffic issues and people getting hit by a car. What can we do to unclog this bottleneck here? We're going to create a bridge, right? All right, so now picture this. You see these construction sites with this elevator that runs up and down to bring material on the floor here. You guys keep running over the same old scenarios and the same old scenarios. And a lot of these meetings here, just from this first one that I attended, started to sound like a lot of stuff you hear, happening through a debate. These things right here, what if on the second floor you started it? What if on these new buildings that you're here, because these are new times, we could send a person to the moon a long time ago. I don't understand why we couldn't do this, right? Okay, well, business is behind everything. Again, we're not going into a debate, but what if you brought the elevator on these new buildings and you actually get down to these architects and designing these buildings to where the elevator really starts a little bit high enough to leave enough room to walk on your sidewalk, and actually build the elevator out towards the outside of the building and kind of design the inside to where the elevator space that would normally be on the inside of these buildings are excess apartments, and that runs how many stores up? I mean, I really do believe that our engineers today are capable of doing a lot more than what they do about designing a pretty building. Michelle, yes, nobody wants to share a bathroom. I agree with you 110%. I mean, granted, if you have to share a bathroom with the other, then I'm sure price is going to somewhat whatever. I don't agree with the force card. Okay, well, take it or leave it. The supply's not there, so you're still going to pay the same damn amount and have to suffer a penalty for it. I agree. I hate that car too. Okay, but the bottom line is, I really think that there's a lot more that can be done throughout the city to capitalize more city dollars than what's being done. I have numerous things in my head. I have two right offhand that the city can do to generate more funds in general, which would take tax dollars from elsewhere and to put into other things. A lot of these things are going to have to be done on paperwork. They're going to have to be brought up to these investors, and things are going to have to be negotiated that way. But I honestly do believe that if we're going to utilize the space that we have, we need to do it brilliantly, and we need to do it efficiently, and we need to do it effectively. And I believe these buildings can be engineered a hell of a lot better than what they are being engineered, and a lot more creative. And I don't think it's going to be an eyesore. I think it could look just as beautiful as a lot of these modern buildings do. But you move in the elevator out of the middle, which is going to make a better layout. You can connect all the plumbing side by side. It's all intertwined. I think it would actually be more beneficial. I don't know. I'm not an architect, but I think it'd be something to actually look into as a designer of these brand new buildings that you're putting up. And I just want to throw something outside of what you normally talk about. It may not have to do about zoning, but you guys are talking a lot about square footage and creating new apartments. And I think that would be something to come up with, because I see some of these buildings, they have 8 elevators in it and hardly anybody's coming out of them. I'll give you the rest of the 30 seconds of the time.
Thank you. Rita.
I just wanted to clarify for Michelle. I was talking about the city-owned property that Scott Stringer had identified, not where we are, with nothing is being built. And I want to thank Michelle for reading. I completely missed it, of a bathroom down the hall. No, we can't go backwards. But thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. And with that, I'm turning this back to Elizabeth.
I think we have, first of all, do we have any old business? Any new business? I have one piece of new business. Okay, we'll be looking into the casino proposal, and if it affects the Upper East Side, we will take it up at our next meeting. And so fortunately, I don't think there is any new business, so that we can release ourselves and go end our starvation.
Marco?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, Michelle is clearly seconded. Any objection?
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
See you next
everybody, for
time.
coming.